Yeah, this is impressive, Talia. I'm really impressed.
So welcome, Laura. So yeah, we were classmates at CCNM back in the good old days. Class of 2014. Yeah.
Not so long ago.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's not. It's like only a karmic cycle, 7 years. And
It's perfect.
yeah, Chinese medicine cycle. Um, and you wrote a book. You wrote a book,
So
Beyond
I
Digestion,
did.
right? Yeah.
I did. Yeah, it's still sinking in.
Yes. So can we talk about like what led you to write this book? We'll see where that question takes us.
Absolutely. Interesting process because it's been poking me for a little while. And it's one of those things. It's like when I came into naturopathic medicine. Obviously, this is my second career, and it poked me for a while, and I kept shelving it, going, no, I can't do it. No. And so eventually I did it. And then, you get into practice, you start seeing things, and you're working on your own health, obviously, because I've had a lot of health issues of my own that ultimately naturopathic medicine have really, really been helpful. And so that's been good. But also, you start attracting patients into your clinic that have similar issues. Lo and behold, they show up and they teach you. And I'm so grateful for all the patients that have taught me things. And over, I think, I'm not sure when the idea of a book started poking at me, but a little bit of the ways into it started to poke me. And I was following some of the some things online that were, okay, you can write a book and here's how you do it. And I'm like, I have no idea how to write a book. I have no clue. This is a ludicrous idea. Um, so I started, I would write my blog posts and articles and things like that. And I, would always have that feeling, oh, I'm not good enough to do any of that. But then it came really strong. So summer of 2019, I would say fall of 2018, ahead of that, the feeling started to get stronger. And I remember in the winter of 2018, actually doing like a visionary process, and all of the things on that visionary process had come to fruition except for um, writing. And on the day that I'd done that visionary process, actually, there was in the sky a cloud that was shaped as a feather. And that was really weird. And I'm like,
Like
okay,
a
this
quilt.
is, this is, yeah, like a quilt. Okay. I'm like, oh, that's nice. And so then things just started getting stronger and stronger in the feeling of it. And then by the summer of 2019, I was like, okay, either I'm going to do this or I'm going to like just say that's it. It's not for me. So it's either, get at it or forget about it. So there was a group, a publishing group that came to Toronto, and they were offering a process to help guide you in writing your book. So it's called Scribe. And I thought, okay, it's coming to Toronto. I have no excuse. I don't have to travel. So I went and did that. And then I started writing in September 2019. And that carried me forward through until when the book released in February of 2021. And I knew it was going to be about an 18-month process. So I was okay with that. It takes, I would say, like 4 to 6 months to kind of get the rough draft out. Um, for me anyways, because it was new for me, a new process. It's learning, and then some time to edit, lots of editing time, and then time to get it all polished and put the lipstick and polish on for the market. And that brought us to February.
And then now it's released. When was the release
And now
date? Yeah.
the 23rd, yes, which was
Amazing.
really interesting because the 23rd, so much happened in our family. It was my sister's birthday.
It's my
My daughter
birthday.
really, your birthday. Oh, there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Your birthday. My daughter released her first single on the satellite radio, so she's a singer-songwriter,
Wow.
and that happened. My son moved. I mean, there was just so much going on.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
it was really interesting, just a big pivotal day.
Yeah. Big
But as we
energized
know,
day.
big energized day. But as we know, these things aren't ever just one point in time. It's just a part of the process, part of the continuity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was like this repeat message that you need to get this out there in book form Because although, the information exists through you, either through the work with your patients or your blog posts, sometimes it's like, we're called to a specific medium because the people that we're destined to work with or who need the message need to consume it in that form, so possibly your audience is like energetically calling a book out of you.
Maybe so. Maybe so. I like the idea of that. Because we know there's tons of books out on microbiome health and gut health and the gut-brain axis and, fixing autoimmune diseases. There's so much out there that goes down all the different paths. And what was calling to me is, and what I'm often like saying I'm interested in, is how are we knit together? Like looking like truly holistically at, looking at the physical, looking at the emotional, looking at the cognitive, looking at the spiritual, and how are we knit together, and how does gut health connect to the mind, body, and soul? How does it? And that was the challenge put in front of me, because I'd worked a lot physically on my gut. I have a lot of food sensitivities and just really sensitive there. I'd worked on the physical, done lots of work on the emotional. I don't know, profess perfection. And then the cognitive, how we think, and our circadian rhythms and our cycles. And then I was kind of at the spiritual, the spiritual, okay, well, how does the gut connect to the spirit? Well, that's a far fetch. And actually went kind of down that, and I'm like, ooh, okay, there might be something there. So that was interesting as well. And then when I finished writing the book and editing it, I launched it into a whole new other growth spurt that was really more on trusting myself and trusting that spiritual guidance that comes along, and just saying, hey, maybe there's something there. Then until I fully trust and fully become one with that, I will have persistent things in the gut. And then there's another side that's like, what, maybe those things are just your gift to how we all have these gifts that have the double-edged sword. They're there to teach us, but they're also there as we learn to teach others. And maybe that's what it is for me.
Yeah, I think the best books start off with a question that the writer doesn't know the answer to yet. And it seems like that was that way with you, that you knew a lot about gut health from your own experience, your clinical experience, but how it all tied together was something that you were finding out as you were writing. Because what was the process like? What is, so your book is sort of taking the angle of holistic gut health. Like, how do we connect gut at the center to all these pieces of our existence, like our physical health and wellness, our spiritual, mental, emotional? Yeah, can you walk us through a bit about what Beyond Digestion is all about?
Absolutely. Start at the beginning, and it's very logical, and that's where I started in my approach to things, was very logical or evidence-based medicine, looking for all of those things that are supported with research and studies and proof, scientific proof, and backing that up, so that, because this is what we need in the realm of quote medicine, as conventional terms would imply. So it was going through all of that, and that was very much the physical aspect of it. And then I was going through. Then I kind of go into the emotional aspect, because food or mood, what comes first? People have a lot of issues with cravings. They have an emotional attachment with food. We often feel that food will satisfy those emotional needs within us, and to some extent, we know that. Because we know, it can promote dopamine, food can promote GABA, and then it's looking there. And then it was looking in at the cognitive side, and our sleep rhythm cycles, and the whole circadian rhythm, and all the Zeitgebers. I'm not sure if I'm saying that properly, but it's a German word for what affects our biological clocks. And the fact that our gut microbiome has its own clock, and it works with ours, and it works with our immune system. And the fact that 70 to 80% of our immune system is in our gut, but then we have the gut-brain axis, and where's that going on? So going through the different layers, I often refer to it in the book as peeling the onion, because we're constantly peeling that onion. And when we get to the soul part, we must be connected into something greater than ourselves, something that is of our soul, but the connection to the, the holy and divine spirit that needs to come in with us. And I always say the healing is truly within. That as we allow, just like we take in food and we digest our food, that makes our cells in our body, right? That gives us the nutrients to make our physical component. But then as we take in spirit, that is also giving us life. And that is also growing us from the inside out. And we can see that as simple as, if you think of an emotional or spiritual connection, even if it's just like with your dog, right? My dog loves to sit and hold paws, right? You got to hold her paw and look her in the eye, and she really needs to connect, right? That releases oxytocin for them, and maybe for us too, but it produces the body chemicals that we also have to digest. And connecting with spirit, things are growing within us and then growing out. And we think of sometimes even as, if you're familiar with like our auras or different, parts of our layers of being, from different types of, maybe even metaphysical perspectives, that we have to grow from the inside out. So it's almost like, when we're peeling the onion, we're peeling off those outside layers, but it's constantly growing within. Things are growing and expanding outward, but we have to be able to peel and let go the outer layers in order to be that continual renewed being. And we do this through so many different aspects. And then I take it back to, our gut is the primary sensing organ. Before we were upright citizens, we had like our, what we call our monkey brain or a crocodile brain that does, just those very rudimentary things to make sure our heart's beating and breathing and that type of thing. But our gut actually is our primary sensing organ. We actually sense things through things. I mean, why would we say, our gut feelings, or why would we get butterflies in our tummy, this type of thing. We do truly sense through our gut, and I mean, we create 90% of serotonin in our gut. Now we have 22 different receptors of serotonin in our body, and it does all sorts of different things more than just mood. It stimulates the digestive tract, that type of thing. We make 400 times more melatonin in the gut than the brain. And okay, so it's doing more than just diurnal rhythms. It's actually very healing to the gut cells. Helps it turn over there, so it has some multi-purpose. But we also know that we have like GABA made in our gut. And there's so many different things, like the hormones. We know that our microbiome is responsible for making vitamins and making minerals and making those available to our body. And we know that we have to work in coordination with our microbiome. So sometimes I wonder, is that microbiome, is that part of, the God center? I don't know, but it seems rather interesting to explore. But it certainly can create and interacts with our immune system. And it does so much for us. We have that gut brain access, and we know that when we know that the vagal nerve running along the brain and the gut transports a lot of this information. But we see this all happening, again, just back into the layers of what's going on. It seems that the gut is really what knits us together.
It's really
on
interesting.
So many different levels.
It's like the interface between us and the outside world, but it's interesting to think of it as it's an interface between us and the spiritual world. And I'm just relating it to, maybe we'll just get super metaphysical super fast, but relating it to even the idea of like most psychedelic plant medicines are ingested. And so through the ingestion of compounds, we can access spirit. But, even, like our mood is regulated through the bacteria in our gut, and the nervous system in our gut. And, through various other podcasts where we talk about the gut, and you can never have enough because there's always a different angle, like the spiritual and mental emotional angle. And our vagus nerve is mostly afferent, so mostly like it's 80% from gut to brain. Like Dave Miller calls it, what does he say? Butt to brain. Which is so interesting because we think, and often in practice, I'm always sort of you'll always, anxiety or mood issues and gut stuff go hand in hand in like 90% of people. And you're always I'll sort of go with whatever's most of a concern for my patients. If they're mainly complaining about mood issues, we'll kind of go that way. If they're mainly complaining about gut, we'll go that way. But when I remember about that vagal nerve track going from butt to brain, 80% of it's like a highway where 80% of the cars are moving in one direction. We have to think maybe we should always start with the gut, if there's any sort of gut stuff, or even if there's not, because we know gut symptoms don't always manifest themselves as physical symptoms that we would recognize as arising from the gut too, so.
That is so true. It's
Yeah.
so true. And I mean, it's right to find what window of opportunity that the patient is ready on a conscious or subconscious level to open up to, because the body will tell us, or the patient will tell us in front of us what, where they're ready to open up from. And that could be from approaching it from the mood point. It could be from approaching it from, gut health point. But always in the back of my mind, what I've learned, especially when I get stumped with cases, it's like, wow, we're really not seeing the progress that that I'd expect, or I'd like to see, or I feel is possible. And it's always like, oh, the gut, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And then it'd be like, oh goodness. And then now lately, after writing the book, I'm like, yeah, silly girl, don't even not think about it.
Right.
Always think about it,
Right.
and see what needs to be done, see what's happened, because we know that so much affects gut health, and we're seeing a ton of it. I mean, it's just the research is exploding from a scientific point of view, but we're also seeing more and more patients showing up with issues with digestion. And part of the words beyond digestion, stress is a huge thing. And when we take things on that are beyond our ability to digest, it does us harm. And I think we have to we're digesting, yes, our food, but we're digesting environmental toxins. We're digesting the hormones. We're digesting environmental hormones or xenobiotics. We're digesting the emotional chemicals from stress. I mean, this whole pandemic is beyond our digestion, right? A lot of people are very stressed and very on edge because they just can't fathom what's going on. And it's more than they can take on. And it's a lot of reframing, a lot of stress management as a part of calming, yes, that vagal nerve, right? Because the vagal nerve, innervates so much of our digestive tract. And if we're always in that flight or fright, right? I call it flight or fright sometimes, fight or flight, but also fright. It can cause issues. And, so it's always thinking, oh, how's the gut responding? Oh, okay, what's going on there? What's happening? And trying to keep that in, if not in the forefront, in the back of our mind.
It helps us get away from that analytical ruminative brain. If we tap into our third brain, our gut brain, it's more of a, like you said, like an intuitive brain. It's more of you often talk like, where's the truth coming from? Is it coming from your head, your heart, or your gut? And I think very rarely people will answer that the truth comes from your head. I think so. The more we can kind of tap into and be aware of our gut, it might help guide us through times of uncertainty.
I love how you mentioned the gut, the heart, and the head, because I talk about this too, because I always say the gut first senses. Okay, it's our primary sensing organ. Then the heart feels. The heart feels those emotional chemicals that have been created, and it's feeling it. And the heart has to, you have to allow the heart to feel, right? And this is something that I've had to learn, to open up the heart, because, through all of the, my past experiences, it really had, I guess, gone into hiding in some regards. I wasn't truly feeling things. Now I'm feeling things, and that's, good and challenging. But I think the gut senses, the heart feels, but then the brain tries to make sense. It tries to put words, right? Because we know our left brain, logical language, left logical language. That's what tries to take, as we're bringing up from the gut through to the heart, it's going into the right brain. And we know our right brain is connected to creativity, and creativity is ultimately the divine, because divine is creation. Then it's jumping over, and it's trying to make that connection over to the left side of the brain and put some logic, language, or label, even if we're going to get into our L's, a label on what's going on. And it's only doing our best to describe our experience and our sensation of what we're feeling, right? And I love listening to little kids describe, how they're feeling, because they'll be like, oh, it's an uncomfortable, feeling that I just, I feel warm, or I feel cold, or I feel wormy. They use all the great words that we shut out because we need to have the logical stuff, right? We need to have something that makes sense, so that we're not embarrassed by what comes out. But I love when patients sit in front of me and I'm like, just explain what you're experiencing. Like, what's the feeling? And I'm like, don't try to don't dress it up. Just keep it raw, because this is a language of the body, and we know that it needs to come out. But you and I also know, Talia, that if we're not expressing our emotions, if we're not allowing that gut to sense, the heart to feel, and us to kind of process and act, accordingly, to appropriately express, then things get locked into our tissues. And this isn't a far out concept, because emotions are chemicals, right? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, GABA, serotonin, emotions are chemicals. And if those chemicals aren't properly degraded and digested, then they get stored in the connective tissue, in the fat cells, and things like that. And that's where we see, disease happening.
Yeah, it's like being able to take in our thoughts and emotions, digest them, process them in the way that the gut digests food. Like a lot of us are. And also moments of rest from all of the mental activity. Like we want to rest our gut, sort of, similar processes happening, or parallel processes, where we take in food, we process and digest that food, we assimilate the food, we pass the waste or the leftovers. And then there's periods of time where we're not digesting, we're not consuming. Same thing with the thoughts. But I think we're also just, it's like we're at this 24/7 buffet, just ramming more and more and more into our heads. There's no time to assimilate it and process it. And, so stuff kind of gets backlogged or it's like we all have mental constipation.
It's true, right? Like, it's beyond our digestion. We take on too much, and why do we fast? We fast, overnight, but sometimes these extended fasts. Why do monks and priests and why do they talk about in faith aspects the opportunity to fast? You fast so that you can connect with the spirit. You're no longer digesting your food. Now you can digest emotion, spirit. You can bring that in and be able to digest that. So sometimes, we've been living in this society that's been go, 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 go. And sometimes it's too much. And when people have sat quiet over the past year and had more time on their own, some people are not comfortable with that, because now they're faced with, oh, I've got to digest this, right? Things come up and they're like, oh, and they're still trying to push the skeletons in the closet. And that can be harmful too, right? Because the closet gets full. And we need this time. And I think, generation over generation, we learn things. And, as we learned in school, I forget who said it. I forget who it was, but in 10 years, everything we learned, there'll be a certain percentage of it, whether it was half of it or something, that won't be applicable anymore, right? But in that period of time, we had to trust what we know, because that's what we knew. We can only ever trust what we know at the time. And do the best we can with that. And we can't judge that, but we also have to be willing to let some things go as we move forward, because we change in the body. Our cells turn over every 10 years. We're a new human, a new, right? So what we do and what we feed it emotionally, physically, and spiritually will contribute to who we are 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Our cells in our gut turn over every 3 to 5 days, right? Not all at once. Same thing with our body. It's not like we totally go down to ashes and now up comes the phoenix of a new person, metaphorically sometimes, but we're constantly turning over. We're shuffling off, skin cells, gut cells, eyelashes fall out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, it's like there's always a chance for a do-over. You always have you always have another chance at renewal. You're more accurately constantly in a state of renewal. And as you're talking about, everything we learn in 10 years will be obsolete. I mean, I'm just reflecting back on school, and we got little sprinklings of microbiome information, but even at the time, it hadn't snowballed to the extent that it's relevant right now in the research, So I remember, and it's funny because all this time, through billions of years, we always had a microbiome. There's always a microbiome. We just didn't really talk about it until 5 years ago, even, and so we're just like stumbling upon the truth as we go. And then we're like, oh, I thought this was this, but it's not. Okay, throw that away. Keep moving forward. Oh, look what we're like stumbling upon buried treasure. Like we're just sort of uncovering the treasure that already exists. Yeah.
it's so true. I love that. That's good. That's good.
Can you say a bit more about the gut being our primary sensing organ? You mentioned that, and I wonder if you could unpack that a bit or get into that a little bit more.
What intrigues you? Tell me what intrigues you about that.
About it?
Yeah. What comes to you when I say that?
Yeah, I guess that I'm like I immediately have a visual of a baby putting everything in their mouth, and we don't do that anymore because we were told probably as babies it's dirty. Don't put that in your mouth. So we would take it in visually, but even dogs will eat something, move it around in their mouth so they can smell it to really understand the world. And there's something instinctual about wanting to ingest something to make it part of us or to understand it better. And I think it maybe goes back to what we said before about the gut being the interface between ourselves and the outside world. That's the membrane, the boundary. And we have all these structures in place within our gut that will sample things that are passed through it, that will assimilate, take things in, reject things. Yeah. Is that what you meant by
Absolutely. Yes. And, so let's go there first. Like we sample, 80% of our environment through our gastrointestinal tract. And we're thinking of this too, between our mouth and our bum, right? And we're really like, that proverbial donut, that what's inside of us is really outside of us. And that's where our primary defenses are for our immune system, right? 70 to 80% of the immune system's there, as you're saying, to sample things, to test things out. Is this safe? Is it not safe? But also we rely on the microbiome. 99% of our genes are our microbiome. 1% of us is our human genes, right? So if you can influence your microbiome, like, hey, hello, wake up call, that's going to influence a ton of things in your life. And when the microbiome is off, that's going to affect how you're functioning. So we need these guys down there. And we know antibiotics will clear them out. Now, I'm not anti-drug, but I do talk about drugs in my book on how different drugs affect the microbiome, because antimicrobials will offset the balance. Now, sometimes we need to, because we have things that we need the hammer, right? We need to pull out the hammer to really hit things on the head and reset what's going on. But then are we following that with probiotics and caring for the gut? Are we eating in a way that feeds the microbiome so that we're not just feeding ourselves, we're feeding these bugs in our gut? What do they like? Well, they love things with fiber, right? So they can make all those nice short chain fatty acids, and short chain fatty acids and protect us. They keep us healthy. They make, they help make us, vitamins and minerals and things like that, like I talked about before. So we are sampling a ton of our environment physically that way, through our gastrointestinal tract. So lots of things from that perspective, and relying on the microbiome to work with our immune system. And with the microbiomes out of balance, and obviously, things start to dominate, a bit of a domino effect. We see that with leaky gut. We see that with things on the go. So, what's affecting the gut? We think of, were we vaginally born or C-section? Were we breastfed? Where did we live? Did we grow up on a farm where we're sampling the dirt and the dog hair and, all of that? What are we eating? What's on our food? Are there glyphosates on our food? How is the phosphate, overload affecting our system? Should we eat organic? That's kind of part of it. Okay, well, what sprays? What are those toxins doing? As we're ingesting things. What drugs are we taking? We know that even when you're taking more, 5 or more drugs, the microbiome shifts with any drug to help break it down. The families of bugs that need to break that medication down will upregulate so that we can adjust with that. We also know that things like SSRIs or antidepressants and antibiotics, these all have an antimicrobial action. We also know that the birth control pill can have a bit of an interesting reaction. And there's a reason why we don't take, why when you take antibiotics that it can put the use of the birth control pill redundant, right? They always say, oh, are you on the pill? When you're taking these antimicrobials, use a condom, that type of thing, because it's going to deplete the effectiveness of the pill. They knew that. They also knew that the pill depletes our multi-minerals and our B vitamins, so that if you're on the pill, you should be supplementing just to off balance that. We know that levothyroxine, and lots of people have thyroid issues, and our levothyroxine, that increases our susceptibility to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Does that mean that we stop taking that? No, not necessarily, but maybe we need to be more aware of that, and every once in a while do a little tidy up or a little work on the gut to make sure that we're supporting it properly. Our genetics make a difference. Some people don't make enough of the FUT2, or they have a SNP in the FUT2, and with that, they're more challenged to retain a healthy microbiome. So they likely need to supplement long term with probiotics.
That's interesting.
Stress effects. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's interesting. I haven't seen it framed that, like I haven't heard that. And that makes sense because there are the people who tend to do a dose of probiotics, feel great, lasts. Others that just sort of runs through them, like, water off a camel's back. Is that even an analogy? But it sort of just like flows through. And so they're always feel a little bit better on a probiotic. And that's interesting that there's this genetic reason for that, or potentially genetic component to that.
Yeah. And our food, right? I mean, we used to eat a lot of fermented foods because that's how we made our food last, right? That's how we preserved it. And it's, it's how we survived through some of the winters or the harsher climates. And now, we don't take that. And I have to admit, I never, never took much of that. And like people think, oh, yogurt, but a lot of the yogurt's just like sugar and goop. It's not, there's not enough probiotic in that.
Yeah.
Maybe a kefir that's not sweetened, right? And I think kombucha can have some different things in the SCOBY that we're not always, if the gut is not healthy, that can actually make things worse. So sometimes I'll hold off on them.
A couple of weeks ago, I was like, I'm going to make my own kombucha again. And it turned and I didn't see it. And I was like, why is my gut really off? It took a while to haul the ship back on track again.
Exactly. But sometimes these things don't even taste good to us until we get to the point.
Right. Yeah.
So there's so much that affects the gut that way. But then also you do yoga, right? Are you yoga certified?
Doing yoga teacher training right now, but it's been something I've done for so long, and it's sort of this thing where I'm like, I think everybody should do yoga. I can't see how, it's just flexibility in general, but because flexibility prevents injury, keeps tendons healthy, muscular health, and you can just do. You're taller when you do, or some sort of well-rounded exercise regime. So for me, yoga just a simple all-in-one package where there's strength, flexibility, stamina, various things. But yeah, I do yoga.
Yeah, so it's a lot of stretching and things like that. But then you also learn, about the different chakras, right, and the solar plexus.
Mm-hmm.
So
And the energetics, yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, so the energetics of the solar plexus, and I think soul, it's where our souls are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I smiled at that when I thought of that one thing. Like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
is
Solar.
that part of it?
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know. I
But
don't
it
know,
is,
Lisa.
yeah, like that. Yeah, I forget. Well, I mean, yeah, the sun heart connection, and then that's really where the warmth is in the body, the burner, the heat center. Yeah, that solar plexus is our will. A lot of people struggling with willpower fatigue or decision fatigue, or just not feeling sunny, like there's nothing sort of shining in their bodies and their lives. That like dark cloud, the weariness, the overwhelm, the congestion is so common in people, so to
And
shine the light, heat the furnace.
yeah, and we think, you think light and truth,
Right,
and
right.
right, and truth brings us back to kind of the divine side of things.
Mm.
But I think, so I explored that a little bit. I mean, I don't know the answer. I don't know, but it was questions that came up, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
going, oh, this is interesting to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I don't know if you've ever read the book Women, Food, and God by Janine Roth.
no, but I'll have to write that down.
So it's good. It's great. It's essentially a book on emotional eating. But one of the things she says that I'll never forget is that all roads lead to enlightenment. So you might start with, it just depends how far your teacher is willing to take you. So if you're going to read a book on, let's say, weight loss, and you're sort of taking an emotional eating approach, she's like, this book will take you to God or to enlightenment, because there's no, whatever your entry point, whether it's gut health, it can take you as far as, to divine truth, just like anything, if you follow it farther enough. So it's really cool that you did that you didn't just stop at the research and what food should you take out and what food should you put in the structure of the cells. You're like, well, how does this connect to the beyond digestion? Like, how does this connect to the ultimate capital T truth of our existence? And yeah, in the dark hollow spaces of the body, maybe.
Yeah, it's like, what's going on there.
Yeah.
And look at things like vibrationally, what goes on, because every cell in our body vibrates, and looking at the vibrational frequency of what's happening there, because there was only one study and it wasn't very well done, but on you can, when you vibrate the body, you change the microbiome, you change how it works. And I'm going, well, that's interesting. I think it's pretty, not too many studies out there, but okay, moving on. You said something a minute ago, I was just trying to pick up on it. As we were talking about yeah, it'll have to come back. But you talk about the solar plexus and just that whole connection and what's going on there. Oh, I know, because I was talking about, the beginning of the book was very logical, yes, and then the second half of the book goes more into, the right brain, more into exploring things, but also touching on in that bridge between the left and right, that emotional synapse of cravings. That was something that you had mentioned, because food cravings and that type of thing. And I find often, I have people coming to me and they're just like crazy craving, especially for sugar, right? And we know sugar is more addictive than cocaine. The research proves that it is more addictive. It rewires your dopamine synapses in your brain. And it does that more strongly and than even cocaine will do to the dopamine. But we also know that the bugs in your gut can drive your mood and your behavior. I just posted, there was an interesting researcher out of, it was Ireland. I just posted this morning on LinkedIn. He's talking a little bit about that. But I talk about in my book, and I see this a lot in clinic, people with sugar cravings often were thinking of the candida overgrowth. And I know that there was this big, wave that, oh, everything is candida overgrowth. Not necessarily. When you do the microbiome analysis, there's not always candida growing in there. It's not everything. But people who have really strong sugar cravings, it's often pretty telltale. And as soon as you do the gut reset and work on balancing the microbiome, you often see the cravings go down. But it's a really tricky thing to do because these little critters really want sugar, and they make you think that you need sugar. Like you are not going to survive in the next 5 minutes unless you have something really sweet. And that, it's getting over that. So I'll use things like Gymnema or inositol, and then just a lot of other things. It was really interesting. I had a patient in the last little while, and she was having issues with this, and we were working on, a lot of the gut reset, like the physical stuff, getting the microbiome rebalanced so that, we have, more healthy bugs in there and less of the candida or whatever. She didn't want to do a test, so I was just kind of going with symptoms and clinical aspects. And we got to a point where, we were bringing in the soul in again because she was really disconnected. I was just smelling a lot of shame. And I'm like, wow, there's a lot of shame going on here. And, so we brought shame out of the closet, reading in Brene Brown's, Gifts of Imperfection, shame loves to hide. It does not want to see the day of light. And when, and according to like Richard Rohr, reading on him, when you, in order to eliminate the darkness, you have to shine light on something. So shining light on the shame, or bringing it out of the closet, helps us, it goes away, the darkness goes away. So, going through and talking about, what is the shame behind some of this? Because what was happening is that her soul was so hungry, and the message was going up, and, her brain was going, oh, well, eat a cookie, right? So she's, eating cookies, but her soul's still hungry. Her soul doesn't want a cookie, right? Her soul needs to create, to connect, to, and as soon as, so in addition to working on the physical stuff of the gut and the things that we know, the science of our plant medicines and probiotics and things like that, we're also working on that emotional side of things and the emotional craving that, oh, this isn't going to be satisfied with food. The answer isn't in the bottom of the bag of cookies or the barrel of ice cream. You get, it's like that prize you used to get as a kid at the bottom of the cereal box, you can eat all the cereal to get to the prize. You're eating all the cookies trying to get the answer of your problem. And then you're going like, well, wait, but the answer's not there.
Yeah.
But, so it's just kind of going, oh yeah. And then realizing what's going to satisfy the soul, and then working on activities to satisfy that. To whatever the person needs in their life, right? And recognizing and trying to work through if there's shame there, or if there's something that needs to be dealt with, because often when that's not dealt with, other things come into play. So it's working on those things and appropriately using food to nourish our bodies in the sense that it was meant to, not to try to solve our problems.
Yeah, there's so many things there. And I think, you started the conversation with that, with like, okay, so, emotional cravings could be the cause of engaging in unwanted nutritional habits, let's say, but it could also be the microbiome or the physical cravings, like a physical reason for the cravings. And how do you unwind the two? And then one can feed the other, because emotional craving, I always forget about candida overgrowth, because I think we've been, but it came back to me over the last couple of weeks. I was like, candida. A friend was struggling with a bunch of things, and I was like, oh my gosh, you've got to cut sugar and do some antimicrobials. Yeah, like these hollow space infections, like sinus stuff, vaginal infections, gut infections, like a lot of these like histamine stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, candida, could it be? But also this piece of, yeah, I mean, eating to serve the bugs in our gut, which may be in an imbalance, but also eating to feed our souls, you know? And you're like, that's, once we uncover that, that's so helpful. Because I think what shame can do is keep us in a cycle of restriction and binging and restriction and binging, because we feel shame for maybe emotional eating or succumbing to craving. So then we respond by restriction, which then then creates an actual physical craving for food because you need nourishment. And you're not going to have a chicken and salad if you're hungry. If you're desperate for food, you're going to get the cookie, you know? You're in an emergency now. So it's so complex and interwoven, and it takes, you know, I think it takes one-to-one work with a practitioner to really tease it out and really understand it, have someone bear witness to it, to say, I smell shame. Let me help you pull that into the light. And shame dies when you shine light on it, but also when you shine light on it in the company of somebody. Like shame really thrives in isolation, you know? So
yeah. And it can thrive if you're sharing it with the wrong people too.
Yes.
That's something Brene Brown had talked about as well. That you know, somebody has to earn your trust or earn that seat to sit in the role, because it really just, as you said, needs a witness, not a judgment seat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, someone who's on your side, you know, you're like, I'm not here to just take away your cookies, but I just want to find out like what's going on with you. I'm just sensing stuff. And yeah. I'm curious too. I'm curious too about your story. Like you mentioned an interesting gut health because there was a personal story and just sort of your journey. And I think that's most of us practitioners that are drawn to specific focus, because maybe we see it clinically, but often we're trying to heal ourselves. We're trying to engage in the process to find the answer for ourselves or our families or something usually, you know, more personal. But maybe if you feel comfortable, or whatever parts you feel comfortable sharing, like if you could sort of outline, like, what's your gut health journey been like for yourself? Like, and I know that ND ship is your second career. So that's always an interesting story when you pivot and go through the grueling process of becoming an ND when you already have a career. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, things call us. I think mine goes back a long time, and you know, I suspect that, you know, I have some really strong, you know, kind of gluten intolerance. And I don't know if I have celiac because I stopped eating gluten, and I never want to, you know, even if I get like a little bit that's by accident, it's not a fun experience. So I'm not wanting to eat it for, you know, 7 days or more ahead of a test in order to test for it. It's just not of interest. However, you know, even as a child, I had a lot of issues that would line up with, you know, gluten insensitivity, you know, like just small growth percentile, a lot of issues with my teeth and my teeth enamel, issues with constipation as a child, issues with, you know, when I got into puberty, delayed puberty, and potentially polycystic, thyroid issues, you know, just different things on the go, hormone imbalance. And I'm like, you know, where is this all coming from? And I didn't really know. Like, I'm just, you know, you still unpack it years later. And as, you know, as we learn more as a generation over generation, and the science starts to come out and you hear other people's stories. But I did some fitness competitions when I was in my teens, and I'd always done gymnastics as a kid and loved to be active. And so this was just a way for me to stay healthy and do things. I had to stop gymnastics because my knees were sore and I couldn't do it. I had to stop cross country running because it was either, you know, get surgery or don't run. So I said, oh, fine, I'll cycle because I don't want surgery. You know, at 16, the idea of, you know, not exercising for not being able to be active for, a couple of months just wasn't appealing to me. It seemed like forever,
Yeah,
right?
totally. Well, especially if you're
Yeah.
16. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, well, I'll cycle and I'll, do some weights and things like that. So, I learned how food affected your physiology. And it's like, wow. And also while I was on, it was a diet, and that time it was like really low fat, but hindsight, not all that healthy, but lots of protein, lots of vegetables, and nuts and seeds and things like that. But there was no gluten, right? Because you weren't eating those types of carbohydrates. And I was like, wow, my brain, that's so clear. I can focus, right? And, I just didn't know if it was a high from, all of the exercise or what it was. So then of course you go back to old habits and you finish competing and you go back to, you know, eating a little more what you would say, quote, regularly. And then, over the years, you're like, oh, this doesn't feel so good, right? So then after I had my kids, and well, let's just, just for exercise, for a good exercise, let's do some competing again and to give us a focus. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting. And then of course, gluten tastes good, right? Like there's we can actually be addicted to gluten. There's something called gluteomorphins in it that we can be addicted to. And yeah, I think that's in my repertoire. But but it was interesting because at CCNM, of course, very stressful program, and I'm commuting, back and forth, and family, and lots of things going on, just personal growth and personal change and things going on there, and realizing like, oh wow, like I had rashes and issues with my digestion and this mental clarity and thinking. So then I thought, oh well, let's maybe go back to that diet again. So it was kind of a slow, and it wasn't like I always say evolution, not revolution. It wasn't like I quit overnight. No, I just started to wean it out and started to feel a little better. And then, I had kind of got to a point where it was everything but the oatmeal, and still had some rashes and things going on. And that was it. But also, so then I took that out, and the rash cleared up in a few weeks. But then even, things in my digestion persisted after I graduated. And I remember standing at the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables, and I felt like my knees were being sliced, and my joints were really sore. And so I did some testing, and it looked like probably a candida overgrowth. And I'm thinking, no, well, based on my medications and based on my sugar cravings, this makes sense. But I didn't know much about it at the time. They didn't talk about it that much in school because there had been such a craze on it, and I think it was, everything was being labeled, oh, it's candida. Well, it's not always. And I'm like, oh, for me, maybe it was, because I had a lot of other food sensitivities, as you were talking, like histamine intolerances and things like that. So then I went on the long journey of, the elimination diet and eliminating things, food sensitivity testing and working through stuff, and then working on the gut. It's always been like a continual journey. Perimenopause comes and you have extra stress on the body again, things kind of fall down as health wise, and then you're picking yourself back up again. But it's always kind of looking back at what's going on in the gut. So it's always been kind of friend or foe, getting to know what's going on in there and trying to learn to take better care of that. Maybe I haven't done such a great job, and now I'm learning how to do that better.
It's like, yeah, the gut health is like the ship that steers you through school and having kids and perimenopause, like all the changes that are part of life. But you're like, if my gut health is steady and there's no leaks and there's no, like issues with the rudder or the sail, like then I can kind of weather these changes and bounce back a little bit better, feel more resilient through the changes in the body. Yeah, and I love your gluten elimination story, because I was the same. I mean, I needed to be convinced right, left, and center from every angle
Yeah.
internally to really remove it. I think, and it also started with a very restricted, like I think a lot of us will do something restrictive initially. So for me, it was like these shakes that they passed out at I don't know, it was some like lunch and learn, and they gave us these like shake detox things, and I did it. And so obviously super restrictive. It was like one meal a day and different shakes. and you feel better. And it takes a while to tease out what were the components that made me feel better. You know, it wasn't like you said, like your initial diet was low fat, and you're like, well, it didn't really have to be so restricted with the low fat, but definitely the gluten was a key component to me feeling a big shift. And it's so much easier to just focus on not eating one thing than the whole meal plan and diet plan that you probably had to follow. But yeah, I needed to reintroduce, let's say, many times and feel crappy and repeat that process until now. I genuinely can say I'm not tempted, you know, because I think the association that I've created of feeling crappy after having something with gluten is so tightly connected that it truly doesn't taste good. And I say that not from like, I don't even need to like consume gluten. It's more, it's like it just genuinely, I just won't have pizza because it feels horrible. And not everyone experiences that, so it may be more tricky, but it's useful. It's useful to understand that it won't be an overnight thing necessarily, and that if it isn't for you, if it's taking you years, then like when I was at CCNM for the first year, I was living with my grandmother who's Italian, and I would come for lunch with a bucket of pasta. It was just pasta too, no protein, just like a bucket of pasta, and I'd be sitting there eating it. Like, I don't need to be gluten-free. Everything in moderation.
I'm Italian, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Italian. It doesn't matter that every Saturday I have a migraine where I can't function all day. I'm cool. I'm bloated, and yeah. So we're all in a journey. So there's really, no. So sometimes, if I'm working with a new patient and they're coming in and I sort of feel that an elimination diet might be helpful, and if they are ready to take it on in the first visit, that's a miracle, because I was not that way. So it's something remarkable when someone's like, just, okay, I'm ready. Take whatever you need from my life.
Yeah.
But is that when you're working with somebody with gut issues and you're working with at the level of food, do you usually, like, how does that work? Is there a process that you have, or is it more individual? Will you start to maybe do an elimination diet, or is it more, restoring nutrition density to food, or like, is there a process that you work with?
We usually look at where they're at, right? Because you have to meet the patient where they're at, and finding out, what you feel they might be ready for. Like, to some people, adding in vegetables is a huge thing. They have a very sensitive bitter receptor, and vegetables taste bitter and they don't want them, aren't raised with them. So sometimes it takes a long, you're just focused on just eat more vegetables. If we're eating 1 cup a day, let's try 2. Or if we're eating none, let's try 1. Knowing that the goal is somewhere between 6 to 10, maybe not every day, but right, like, it's okay. Yeah, we got our lofty goals, but if we're not going to get there overnight, so let's just do small incremental things. Sometimes it's doing the food sensitivity testing. Like, the 3 tests that I would commonly look at are the Cyrix 3, to look at all the different components, because gluten can affect more than just the gut. Sometimes there's no tummy ache. It can affect the brain more often than the gut. It can affect the skin, and the skin that you're in, the skin around organs, things like that. It can also affect the gut. So gut, brain, skin, and like casings around organs. This can be it. But the gluten is affecting more than just the gut. And nobody has the enzymes to break down gluten. So we know that this often can be a common contributor. But so I do a food sensitivity testing, and then the more in-depth wheat testing, and then maybe the microbiome. And I like the GI 360 because it does the PCR and the microbiome growth. Now, no test is perfect. People can complain that these tests are inadequate or inaccurate. They only test for what they test for. Right? They're going to test for what they test for. That okay. You still have to look at the patient. You still have to work with them. So some people need those tests in order to go forward, in order to see what's going on. And others would rather work on listening to their body, right? Our body might be screaming at us, but it might be whispering at us too. So I often say, if you're quiet enough in your own body, you know already what's going on. You already know what's bothering you. You just, you're either in denial or you're not listening. And that's okay, because I've been there. I can be in denial. I can not listen. I can choose to not listen, or I can be totally blind to the shadow of it. That can happen too. It's all part of that continuum. So it's not holding judgment. It's just whatever. So sometimes it might be writing down, here's a diet diary sheet, right? Write down what it is you're eating and when, and what you're feeling like, or how you're sleeping, or how your bowel movements are. And no judgment. Like, I'm not judging what you're writing down. This is just recording what it is you're doing, so you can see, is there a cause and effect somewhere? So be truthful, be honest, right? So even in that, people, we know as soon as we observe something, we change it. And this happens so strongly. As soon as, even in ourselves, if I have to write this down, I'm not going to eat it.
Oh,
right?
so many times patients say that. Yeah, they're like, I didn't eat a bunch of, or I've gotten, which I thought was so cute and funny, a patient, it was like around the holidays, and patient just wrote booze. Like, I'm not going to quantify it. It was a holiday party. Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of people were like, oh, I thought if I have to write this down, maybe I don't want to eat whatever the snack I wanted. Yeah.
Yeah, so it changes, but it's still effective in the effect that, oh, you thought twice about it. And why did you think twice? Was it because you thought it was not healthy? Was it because, if you ate it, it gave you a headache, right? Like, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it wasn't so hard. It was just by shining awareness on it, you didn't want it anymore. So that's powerful. That's really powerful and quite simple, because there didn't seem like there was a struggle. If you just thought, oh, if I have to write, I'm not going to have it. It's easy.
So it can be something as simple as that. So so it's varying degrees of interaction with an individual. The one-to-one that you do as an MD, you're looking at things holistically. You're looking at where everything is at, and that zooming the camera lens out and saying, oh, what's the forest look like? Oh, I see a patch of trees over here that needs some attention. Let's go and look there. Right. And but always coming back out to that zoomed out feature as well, not forgetting to do that. So yeah, so it can involve testing, it can involve just self-reflection. Often you're looking at some course of supplements to reset the gut, but sometimes people, they don't want supplements. Okay. So I had somebody like that, and I'm like, okay. But she was really adrenally depleted. I'm like, do you like the taste of black licorice? And she goes, oh, wow. And I'm like, okay, don't eat the black licorice. But I gave her a little 30 ml vial of glycerize, your black licorice plant medicine. And I just said, take 10 drops of this, around 11 o'clock and around 1 o'clock. And she did that, and that helped even things out. And then she was in a place where she felt more more enabled to take on other challenges. So I said, okay, let's, and she was having some issues with fatigue and just not ever having enough energy. And, so it's like, okay, well, let's, the common offenders are sugar, dairy, and gluten, right? Those are the top 3 common offenders when it comes to food. It can be other things as well, but she didn't want to do testing, and she didn't want any supplements. I'm like, okay, let's try gluten. Because she wasn't willing to give up her orange juice or other things. And I'm like, let's just try the gluten. So she was, okay, I can do that, because it was food related. So I said, even just try to dial it back. So, try to do it through the week, and then just maybe small quantities on the weekend or something. So like a 90-10 rule. And she started to feel really good. And she's like, oh, I want to be gluten free all the time. And so she liked that idea of it. And then her energy started to come back. So you saw some things. And then, her vitamin D was really low, but she didn't want to supplement. And I'm like, okay, I want you to look at, okay, here's some foods. And we know there's not a lot of vitamin D in foods that we pick up, but here's some foods that have vitamin D in it. And here's how much we get out of the sunshine. I want you to tell me if you're getting enough, because she needed to be empowered. And then, so then the next appointment she comes back. And sometimes I find just 15-minute appointments after the initial couple of longer appointments, just 15-minute appointments every 3 to 4 weeks, just kind of keeps people, you can answer their questions, you can keep them on track. And she's like, you know what, I don't think I'm getting enough. And I'm like, okay, so what do you think? She goes, I think I need to supplement.
Mhm.
I said, okay, you can get stuff that's dropped. It's not capsules or tablets. And then you can just put on the back of your hand and lift it off and it tastes like food.
Yeah,
So it
exactly.
was, so yeah, so it's stepping stones, right? Evolution, not revolution.
Yeah. We
Healing the
talk
mind.
about this. Like I have an episode that came out a couple episodes ago about sometimes the way that we maintain our personal power after we felt disempowered by clinical interactions with other practitioners is to reject everything. Like I have that where many patients will say, I don't want supplements, which is totally fine. I mean, there's legit reasons for that, but sometimes it's because I've been convinced of putting things in my body that led to side effects that I wasn't properly informed about. Like I didn't obtain informed consent. And so instead of sort of obtaining or knowing the questions to ask to get the informed consent I need, I'm just going to say no to all of it. My best friend was like that for a bit. She's like, well, I've had all these medical interventions done on me from when I was a child, and so I don't want to just listen to a doctor. So there's sometimes this stuff, but I think, yeah, that's the beauty for our medicine is we can work with a treatment plan could look like anything, and so we take the preference into account for sure to help design it. And you can do it without supplements. You can do it without diet, but you can't do it without anything. You got to, even if you're like, okay, we're going to work with the soul, we're going to work with you finding creativity and connection, then maybe that involves more frequent visits. So, or, so you're like, yeah, we can forego testing, but then we got to do this instead. We can forego nutrition, but then we got to do this instead. We can forego supplements, but then we got to do this instead. And then in some cases, we'll just slowly, gently guide you in the direction of understanding that a supplement is probably the only way to go if you don't live near the equator and hanging on the beach all day, in terms of vitamin D. Like if we're living in the northern hemisphere in the wintertime and not consuming like fish livers, cod livers all day long, we're probably not going to get enough D, so it's good. Yeah, I love that approach. It's just super individualized and just rolling with a patient's needs, gaining trust slowly, and helping somebody find what they need to feel good about their plan and their healing, which is, very different from a lot of people's experience, which is like, if you don't follow my way, you see someone else, or whatever some people may do out of frustration. But
Yeah, it's really about empowering people and lifting them up. Power under, I always say, not power over. Power under them. Give them education. Give them education and experiences and excitement about the changes that they're feeling, right? So, and that becomes motivating for them and empowering for them, so that they feel like, because we live in our bodies 24/7, right?
Yes.
I remember numerous times going to doctors and explaining what I was experiencing, and they looked at me like I had three heads, and I'm like, why? Like, why would they do? I'm like, I'm looking for answers. I'm explaining what I'm experiencing. I mean, I'm just telling you. But yeah, it was a disappointing experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking, I mean, I have a Instagram post percolating in my brain about that. But I'm trying to find the wording for it to make it not sound like I'm dismissing conventional medicine. But basically what I want to help people who've had that experience was like, I've had that experience, like I think most of us have, where we've gone to our conventional system, medical doctors, nurses, and we've asked for help for things and been dismissed. And now with our education as naturopaths, we know why that happened. Like we know, well, I'm not going to go to my doctor for, to tell them that I feel sad or depressed unless I'm prepared to receive a medication for those symptoms. Or, I'm not going to go with normal blood work and a normal ultrasound. I'm not going to tell my doctor about my heavy periods because I sort of understand the limit to which these symptoms will guide me down a treatment journey that within the tools of the conventional system. And that what we experience as, like, one of my patients told me that she went to her doctor asking for blood work. Her doctor said, you don't need blood work. You don't need blood work to test your hormones. Your hormones are normal. And she said, but the last time I got my blood tested with my naturopath, it showed I had estrogen dominance. And as she said this, I was like suppressing a smile because I knew what she's going to say next. And she goes, my doctor yelled at me. And I said, yes, because you have to understand that when you say you have estrogen dominance, it sounds like you're saying that a fairy put a curse on you. And so really what we're doing is just we're pushing the bounds of someone's training and toolkit. And if somebody came to me asking for like financial advice or how do I invest in the stock market and really tell you need to help me, you need to give me advice, I would feel, there's a bunch of things you might feel, right? You might feel incompetent, you're at a loss to help somebody. You recognize you don't have those tools. And if you've been told that these are the tools, that there's nothing else, you might feel defensive or resentful or impatient, or you may dismiss the other person. Like I'm an endocrinologist. Why are you coming to me with, estrogen dominance? Like, that's not a thing. So I think that's, we can see that and be like, oh, that makes sense. Like, why your doctor would yell at you if you said you have estrogen dominance. I wouldn't ever say that to my doctor. But it's hard to know because it's just your body and you're just like, I'm here with I've been tired for 6 months and I don't know what it is and it doesn't feel like me, and I'm here for help. And doctor's like, well, I guess you're just getting old. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of dismissal. I mean, I would never bash the medical doctors because they have been so helpful to me over the years.
Mm-hmm.
There's a time and place for everything, but you're so right. Like, I mean, they have a toolbox, and their toolbox is, yes, labs, imaging, drugs, right? Or referral to a specialist or that type of thing. And there are some fabulous clinicians and medical doctors. And I mean, I wouldn't be here without them, literally. And so great respect. And they know a lot of things that we don't know. And they deal with a lot of things that we don't deal with. But at the same rate, we are in the realms of that holistic care and looking at a person as a whole and looking at, how do we bring things back into balance? And sometimes the conventional system can bring you to health, but you're not fully well.
Right.
And that was sometimes my experience. I was okay, I was functioning and everything, but something just wasn't quite right. And I knew it because I knew it wasn't right. Right. And sometimes it's difficult to explain what that is. But then it was the holistic care that, would help me again. Okay. So that is important to recognize that there's a time and place for everything. And it's helpful in the fact that we can run blood work and comment on blood work, but just, tests only show what they test for. And we know how strong plant medicines can work. And we know a lot of drugs are based on plant medicines, and they just take one constituent and then they amplify that constituent in the formula and create it synthetically. What they lose is that wisdom of the plant and that balance of the plant, which is when we're using our plant medicines, is so helpful.
Yeah. The other constituents that play a huge role in balancing out some side effects of the main one and synergizing the effect, like you said, that all is contained within the wisdom of it.
And I think also of, sometimes you can just zero in on one thing and say, okay, here's the drug to fix that. But that wouldn't be any different than us thinking, oh, vitamin D is going to solve everything.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a cog in the wheel, right? There's an and. And we also know if we were just to give vitamin B in high quantities on its own without the other B vitamins, well, it's going to put the other B vitamins out of balance, and that's not good either. B's like to be together. So we, if we're doing the high dose B12, we got to be doing a B complex to balance that out. It's taking, it's taking those things into consideration too.
Yeah.
We know conventional medical doctors don't have traditionally a ton of diet and nutrition therapy. So then they refer you to the registered dietitians, and they can be helpful in some circumstances. But in my experience, that wasn't helpful because it always was trying to bring you to that food guide that included the gluten and things like that. And for me, that wasn't a fit.
Yeah, it felt more like you were being guidelines were being applied to you versus like an investigation into maybe there is a food that, even though it's in Canada's food guide, might not be right for you, even though it's a whole
Yeah,
food wheat,
exactly. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
plenty of, there's great things about whole wheat, but
Mm-hmm.
the fact that we don't have the enzymes to digest it,
Mm-hmm.
um, nobody does.
Mm-hmm.
Some people get over it and can pass it. That's,
Yeah.
but for others, it creates a lot of inflammation.
And it's so sprayed, and like the glyphosate is just, it's just bathed in it. Most forms of wheat, most kinds of wheat that we're consuming. Yeah. And it's, yeah, I think, yeah, I also want to say, I mean, like, so let's say someone's experiencing a lot of bloating and diarrhea. Yeah, go to your medical doctor, because your medical doctor can run a workup to rule out some of the, let's say, to rule out some of the big things, whether it's an
Absolutely.
autoimmune or actually like a celiac workup can be really useful. And, but then when you're sort of given there's nothing wrong with you, maybe that's when you can start to get a more holistic approach, because your body tells you whether something, and it may not be wrong in the sense that like, you have a disease, but these are signals from your body that there's an imbalance, and there's a lot we can do. Even uncovering vitamin D could be huge. And you're right, it may not cure the person unless all their symptoms are low vitamin D, which sometimes happens, but it's very unlikely that that's the only thing. And, and there's so many ways you can work with it. It can be labs, it can be supplements, it can be diet, it can be a combo, it can be soul searching,
Yeah.
it could be a
I
book.
had a patient. Yeah, it can be anything. Yeah, it can be a book. Um, I had a patient come to me just after Christmas, and she was having a lot of issues with a lot of gas upwards, like a lot of burping and belching, and and then she also had bloody stool, right? She had tarry stool, and I'm like, okay, um, I appreciate you coming to me first, but you need to get some imaging.
Mhm.
And she has had like symptoms of dizziness and just some really extreme things going on, and I'm like, this isn't quite right.
Mhm.
And I was a little uneasy prescribing anything orally until I knew that, do we have ulcers? Do we have colitis? What are we dealing with? Do we have pancreatitis? Is there something going on here? And so it was like, okay. So she went to her family doctor, and they said, okay, da da da, and you'll have a specialist appointment and it'll be there. But then her symptoms started to get worse. And I'm like, you got to get yourself to the ER, because when you go to the ER, they will do all these tests, to rule things out. And quite frankly, if there's, if you're bleeding in the gastrointestinal tract, this is serious,
Mhm.
and we're not going to wait. So
Mhm.
go and figure it out. So she went, she, done all the tests and stuff. And everything, thank goodness, came back negative. And some of her things that were off in her blood work did normalize. So then I was, okay, now we can start thinking about handling things. And we did it ended up being acupuncture. And she did go on they gave her some proton pump inhibitors, which seemed to be helpful, but it wasn't enough.
Mhm.
We did a food sensitivity test, and we were able to identify some things that might have been in the foods that she was getting through takeout,
Mhm.
that type of
Mhm.
thing. And then the acupuncture, getting that energy going in the right direction,
Mhm.
right? Because the energy was all coming up, should have been going down.
Mhm.
And so some of the stress component going on in it. So working through the acupuncture side of things. And then we added in a Chinese medicine herb that really helped balance the liver, spleen, pancreas, you
Mhm.
know, stress axis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because we see that. So yeah, and that was a prime example of I needed that conventional medical component to it.
Mhm.
I wouldn't
That's
have,
a good point. Like you don't need to
right?
choose.
I needed it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
good for patients to know, because I think sometimes we can be painted with this idea of like, oh, if it's not serious, you're a naturopath. But an ND in Ontario and various other provinces that are regulated are able to triage and rule out and find red flags. And we can't do the investigation referrals ourselves, but we can refer you to your family doctor to get some investigation done. And even if you do have a diagnosis or something more serious, and and it's and there's a treatment plan in the conventional system, whether that be surgery or medications, that we can also work alongside you and your conventional plan. So there's really a place for a naturopath in various scenarios, whether you're told nothing's wrong with you, but you still don't feel well, or whether you find out that there's something going on and there's a treatment plan for you in the conventional system. We can still help you because you still could benefit from, bringing some energy down with acupuncture, from managing the stress response, from healing the gut, from being a bit more specific with the foods you're eating. And there's like a whole bunch of stuff that can go overlooked, that is in our toolkit. So it's great.
Yeah, the body's screaming, it's giving out stress response signals. It's interpreting what those are.
Right.
And sometimes we don't find out what it was. The person gets better and we don't really know exactly what was going on, but they're feeling well. And their blood work is looking better. So you're going, okay, we didn't know exactly what it was. And that can be really frustrating, not knowing what something is. Sometimes a label is really satisfying.
Yeah.
But the label is not necessary to always, not always necessary to work with an individual, although it can be helpful. But sometimes we know labels can be misapplied too. So we have to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And sometimes labels can get in the way of healing. Somebody says, I am this.
Yeah.
Right. I have chronic fatigue. They're not willing to let that go. They're not willing to know that maybe that's because something's going on in the gut. And if I feel that, I might not have that anymore.
Yeah.
And maybe they had it for so long, it's difficult for them to take off the lens through which they look at the world through the chronic fatigue glasses.
Yeah.
Right.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. I mean, in some sense, it can be very empowering and validating, but then in other ways can be disempowering. And it's, we label people with at our peril, right? We're at caution with caution. And I mean, when I was on my health journey before becoming an ND, I wanted someone to just tell me what was going on, but everybody was saying it was fine, it was fine, it was fine. So if someone had said you have diabetes or hypothyroidism, I would have been, it's what I was looking for. I wanted them to just tell me what it was. But I didn't want those things, so as long as I had been validated and told that there is a solution and that there is something going on and there's a solution for it, or we can help with it, that would have felt good. I didn't need to have a disease, but at the time I was seeking a label. I wanted them to find something, to legitimize what I was feeling.
Yeah, you're looking to validate your experience. But the nice thing about, when somebody comes to a naturopath is we tend to be good listeners, and people need to be heard, and they need to be seen, and they need to be acknowledged. And sometimes in that experience alone can be very helpful. And, because sometimes you just need to talk out loud to somebody and have them reflect.
Yeah.
And that can be helpful. And then zero in on, oh, well, maybe this little thing to pivot here might get us going, back on track. Because we're really always just trying to get back to, our body's always just trying to get back into balance. And sometimes, we get off balance, and sometimes we get way off balance. And it's just bringing back to center. Kind of like, what we're going on is, you're with the macro, there is micro. And where there's micro, there's macro. We look at that in society and just kind of, COVID has forced us all to be a little more yin, right? We were so yang, and now this is forcing some yin. It can be pretty uncomfortable. And until we allow the flow of the yin, we're not going to fully embrace what this has to teach us.
Yeah.
Just to find, yes, COVID is real, and there's lots of other things to do with it, but for those that are staying at home, and that there's something else to be, gleaned from this. What can you glean from it? What can you learn from it? How can you apply it to make it better, make your life better from it?
It's the metaphorical and figurative and literal cleaning out your closet. Like, we're all, okay, it's a good time to do some spring cleaning on my house now, but then also the internal place, right, where you're like, a lot of this stuff gets pushed aside because we don't have time to deal with it. in our young busy lives, and now there's a chance for it to potentially come to the surface, you know, and less opportunities to distract it or to distract ourselves from it. Yeah.
A lot of things are distractors, right? Like we
Mhm.
choose to be busy because we don't want to deal with it. Oh, I have this I need to do.
Mhm.
Right? I choose to that. It's funny, like sometimes, oh, I have no excuses left. This needs to be worked on. But it can make you feel really uncomfortable because you don't want to face what's in there. Or there's an emotional attachment to it.
Mhm.
And it can be hard. It's not always easy.
No.
Mhm.
Yeah.
If somebody else walked along going, well, that's just easy, that's garbage, right? But you're looking at it, and there's emotional value there that you've vested in it.
Mhm.
And I mean, I deal with that. Letting things go can sometimes be really challenging.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
and
hard.
we think
Yeah.
of that with constipation. Are you letting things go, right? This is, you bring in the Chinese medicine aspect of it.
Yeah, that's my favorite one is, yeah, like what are you having trouble letting go of when you
Yeah.
have trouble letting go of your poop or when your body's not moving it through. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I wonder if, yeah, just doing a closet cleaning can help to, well, it does, because you're reminded of things, you look at things, you see stuff you haven't used in a while, but that you remember. So, it was taking up mental space and energetic space. And then I wonder if that can help constipation. That's the whole gut world interface where you're like, you know, letting go of things mentally, emotionally, or even physical objects may help with constipation.
Yeah, sometimes it can.
Maybe. Yeah, exactly. Like there's no guarantee, but it's there's this connection
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
it might help, right? It might
Yeah.
help. It could be other things going on, right?
Yeah, just like
Could be.
abdominal exercise or like to build more fire in the solar plexus might help with digestion, but we don't know. It's, yeah. I feel like there was yeah, like I guess on the realm of the gut reset. So you're sort of working with food, you're working with herbs and things like that to just shift the microbiome. Again, is that more of that individual practice where you're seeing, where the patient's at and you're starting to work with those things, or is there any pearls or anything like that you'll implement?
Um, I mean, there's things that I'll use and tools that I'll commonly go to, and I find that usually you're looking at least a 3-month program,
Mm-hmm.
and you're layering and you're changing things up, right? Because you're trying to balance the microbiome, and the antimicrobials are a little more gentle, I think, in the sense, and also more inclusive because they're balancing the yeast imbalance if it might be there as well. Whereas an antibiotic, like a prescription antibiotic, um, wouldn't touch the yeast,
Right.
and then you tend to have the overgrowth of yeast from
Right.
that. So we're looking at our antimicrobials that are plant-based, but because, say uva ursi, goes after these types of, bacteria, but then we need, maybe some black walnut to look at parasites, and maybe we need, some, oregano or peppermint oil to help with the small bacterial stuff. And so sometimes it's layering in. So we're not always doing, oh, let's just, same pill for everybody. I like berberis and citricidal with the vitamin A and zinc, and making sure we got vitamin D in there, making sure we have magnesium to help with help process, right? Magnesium's responsible for over 300 things in our body, lots of detox support. So that helps some of the die-off reactions if we have a good magnesium. So maybe we're doing that type of thing. And, so we're putting the berberis and citricidal, kind of doing that for some weeks. And then maybe we're switching it up and doing a formula that has the black walnut and the oregano oil or the clove oil or things like that. If it's, if you have an elderly patient or a child, the peppermint oil made, and terracotta peppermint oil, maybe that's enough. If they have a very sensitive, gentle, fragile system, right? Maybe we're looking at boswellia, frankincense for people with colitis, and helping, put that into remission, if they're dealing with something like that. Always looking at ways to, re-inoculate and getting that. circadian rhythm, half the day we're looking at, killing things off, and the other half of the day we're looking to resupport. Some protocols would do like a 5-day kill and a 2-day build. I like to do a 12-hour to go more with a biurnal rhythm. I don't, that just came from my gut sense that was a good idea. And it seemed to work. So I just kept doing it, right? So I try to keep the antimicrobials one half the day and the building the other half the day. But then what else are we doing to help heal the gut? Do we have, is it safe to take vitamin A? Is it, how much zinc, vitamin D? Okay, 2 baked apples a day. Slippery elm, do we need some slippery elm in there, or marshmallow root, or, other types of things that might heal the gut? Are we dealing with diverticulosis or diverticulitis? And there's some things that we can do there. Is the liver overtaxed? Do we need to support the liver? Because we know non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is often the reflection of what's going on in the gut, right? You get the overgrowth of the gram-negative bacteria, off-gassing too many lipopolysaccharides. Now, lipopolysaccharides are good in small quantities. They help us regulate our melatonin in our sleep rhythm, but too much is very inflammatory, and it causes all sorts of things. And what gets hit first, that portal vein, the liver.
Yeah, and like LPS could be good from some microbes, but not others. And there's there's. So
balance, getting the right balance of stuff going on there. So the gut healing. So you're looking at the classic weed, the classic feed, and then the healing. Providing, and then and then kind of the seed, and layering that, and then what are you doing? What are you doing to, as an ongoing maintenance? What is required? What's in your toolbox? Because I find different people, I mean, each of our microbiomes is different. We don't know what a perfect microbiome looks like. We're all chemistry, different. So what might work for one may not be right for another. So it's kind of finding what might be best for that individual based on their genetic profile, their symptoms, their signs, what they've been diagnosed with, what the research says, what the science says, and finding, some people with colitis, some patients with colitis do really well with Boswellia, and just keep the Boswellia at a good dose, and that keeps them in remission. And if they do that with some Saccharomyces boulardii and maybe another multi-strain probiotic, and then maybe some fish oil and maybe some vitamin D, and that's kind of their toolkit. And then there's other people that may choose to take the monoclonal antibody injection. Maybe they're doing that. That's helping keep them in remission. But then if they happen to get a flare, they know that they can reach for the SAC-B and the Boswellia and bring that on, as soon as they start to recognize something's off, and teach them to learn to listen to their body. What are those initial signs that your body is giving you? Start, have that in your toolkit so they can just start it right away and have, pull those tools out of the toolbox. So some things aren't forever. There's a time and a place, and then sometimes oh, here's my toolbox, I can pull that out.
It's beautiful, right? Like, I love all this because, first of all, when I ask, I'm always curious, like, how do other practitioners approach things? Because it can seem so, I don't want to say messy, but it's complicated. Like, it's a ball of yarn, and you're like pulling from things. You're like considering the portal vein and LPS, and what are the levels and what's actually going on. So what's the actual diagnosis? That's relevant because it will tell us sort of what's going on. Is it inflammatory? Is it an imbalance? Is it motility? And what are all the moving parts? What are the best ways to address it? So obviously the patient in front of you is going to make all the difference, because if that person would rather go a diet route or a supplement route or do the testing, it's going to completely change how you approach it for first steps, and consideration of what herbs work against what bacteria, or what are the broad spectrum herbs, or what are we going to pull in if we suspect parasites, and what are the maintenance protocols, how do we address gaps in medical treatment, like monoclonal antibody therapy. It's not suppressing all your symptoms. So how do we bring in some other anti-inflammatories or manage the immune system? And I think that's so beautiful, because that's really what a naturopath's brain is doing all the time. And I'm sure you've been asked questions by people who have maybe found you online or found you on social media, who sort of say, like, well, what do you think of oregano oil? You know, or what about bananas? Are bananas good for you? And when we say it depends, I feel an energetic like vacuum where people just sort of move away, like, oh, okay, you're not going to help me. But it's not that we don't want to help. First of all, we're not maybe legally allowed to tell you if you should eat a banana or not. And, you know, if you get down to it, we have to really see you as a patient and make individual recommendations, take your case. But it's a process to get to figure it out. In a plan creation involves a million moving parts, you know. Like you probably sit down before you're making one and you sort it out, and we have different practices of like mind mapping things and understanding how it starts. Or maybe we just pick a place to start, like maybe you start doing antimicrobial herbs and you see how someone improves or doesn't improve or partially improves and go from there. So there's like, it's such an art, you know, and that's beautiful. I love how you threw in all your like pieces. And probably when you were writing your book, you were like, okay, how do I bring in this part? And, oh, what about Chinese medicine? How about
Oh,
this?
yeah. That's the months of editing, right? Because you just try to get everything all out. You're literally, and it's funny because through the writing process, the initial writing is that you just write and you don't look back. And guess what they call it? The vomit draft.
Yeah.
You are just like literally like throwing everything up on the paper and getting it out. And
Yeah.
then you take the pieces of the moving parts and you organize them, and then you create, some kind of continuity through it. And I tried to do it so that we go through the physical, the emotional, the cognitive, and the spiritual, kind of in that order, peeling back the layers of the onion, pausing in between each chapter to give people a chance to literally digest what they've just read and a chance to reflect on what's going on. But then realize at the end of the book, as I'm sharing patient stories and sharing my own story, kind of interweaved into that, how much the gut is truly knitting us together. But then we are always peeling our onion. We're never finished. This is our journey. This is why we're here. I don't think any of us ever reaches, actualization, or, that's not in this life.
The nirvana.
This is our, it is the journey, right? It's the journey. We're on a journey. And that's the fun part. That's the important part. And it's our experience throughout that's important. Not the arrival, right? Not the arrival. And so it's sometimes, and for me, it was accepting, well, this is my journey. And maybe I won't arrive to be able to go out and eat a pizza with it, but maybe if I ate that pizza, it wouldn't taste the same, or I wouldn't want it, right? Because I'd be going, no, that's not me anymore. It's not who I am. And I mean, that's just as an example, but so it's the journey. We change, but we're meant to change. We're meant to change and grow, and it's okay. It's not and sometimes we do have things that were imperfect, but those things can be gifts, and those things can help us help others through their journey. And it's just a part of who we are. But it doesn't have to mean that we can't evolve and grow and let things go. So it's just, it's letting go of that attachment to the outcome.
Which can be hard.
Just allowing things.
Yeah, like when you have a goal, like I want this symptom gone, it can be hard to let go of the attachment to it. But the journey metaphor, I feel like I overuse it, but it's like there's no better metaphor, because it is like you're never arriving, and that's sort of just the way it is. Like there's no perfect final state of health, and there's no balance. There's only balancing. Our microbiome's constantly shifting. So are you ever just like, stop right there, that was perfect, this is right? Because then you eat some oats and then it shifts again, and then you have a Diet Coke by accident because I don't know, you just need something, and then it's going to shift, and then you have some broccoli, and it's just, you're constantly in a dance. And dances are beautiful. We don't want to go to a dance recital and just have everyone standing there. You want to see movement. You want to see motion, flow.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And if we're making more choices that um, that put us more in that flow, then that's good.
yeah,
That,
exactly.
that's good.
Yeah, we're always moving. There's always in I don't know though, even improvement might be undermining it. Like I guess there's always improvement, but there's you're always different, like I think I'm running my foundational program right now, and I was like, what would success mean? I mean, our people are going to take this and think that they need to consume and digest all of it, and and then succeed in some way. And I'm like, if you listen to one lecture and you understand that fats aren't bad for you, and you thought that before, that's amazing. That's an amazing win that you'll take with you for the rest of your life. If you've learned that you can eat eggs and it's not going to raise your cholesterol or whatever, that's wonderful. So it could be one small piece that's all you can take in for this program, or all you want to take in, or whatever it is. And that's enough. That's totally enough. And
Yeah, we put things out there, and it's take what you need, right?
yeah,
Take what you need right now, and it's just like a buffet. Take what
exactly.
you need.
That's what I say. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't put too much on your plate.
Yeah.
Take what you need. Take what you can digest right now. And if what you needed, like sometimes I'll get, you have stacks of books, and it's like, oh, I didn't read all that one, but it's like, did I take what I needed right now?
Mm-hmm.
I can come back to it later.
Yeah. And how
Right?
many
And so I
times do
say
you
that
go
up front.
back? Yeah. Like, sorry.
And I say that up front in my book. I'm like, just take what you need from this. Like, I'm presenting this stuff. You may, like as you said, you may need to learn that fats aren't bad, or your eggs don't necessarily, reflect your cholesterol levels in your body. If that's what you needed to learn right now, then you've got what you needed.
Mm-hmm.
There's more in the book for later if you want to come back to it. There's
Mm-hmm.
more in your program for later if they need to come back to it. But if that change made their experience in life better,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Mm-hmm.
then it's accomplished something.
And then you're good. Yeah. It was a
Yeah.
success. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
times do
How
you
do you define
pick
it?
up a book again, read it again? You're like, oh my gosh, where was I when I read it the first time? I didn't take half of the things I'm like absorbing now, with maybe some extra life experience or some different context, or maybe I'm paying attention to the words in a different way that wasn't available to
Absolutely.
me 10 years ago or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Laura. Any last thoughts? Any last things you want to end off on?
Oh, no, I just want to thank you, Talia. It's been a pleasure. Really great to
Yes,
see
I
and chat with
know.
you. Sit
This is
down, have
so
a
much
cup of
fun.
tea on a Monday morning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. After
Yeah.
coffee. Yeah, I guess we're just having water, but that's wholesome, right?
It's all
Yeah, that was
good.
so wonderful. Thanks so much for chatting. And I'm going to grab a copy of your book and read it. I should have done it before the interview, but it sounds so good.
Yeah.
And congrats on that. It's a wonderful
It
accomplishment.
was
Yeah.
it was a learning experience, and I'm sure there's plenty more in our paths. We've always got to be learning and creating, I think.
Yeah.
Creativity. I think creativity is so important to longevity and just keeping our fire burning, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll probably pick up your book in 10 years and read it and be like, wow, I totally forgot I wrote that. Happens to me with old blog posts. I'm like, whoa, that sounded smart. You're like, oh, that was so true that yeah. That's so
Sure,
exciting.
there's things that I go back, what did I say there? I know I wrote something about that. Let
Yeah.
me look at it. It's just like, oh yeah, that's good. Right? Because there's tons of detail there. But
Yeah, but it's true. It's like we're dynamic beings, but you have a book, you have this artifact, this thing that kind of contains all of it, and it contains a journey of you and the gut doing an exploration together, which is really cool. Yeah.
yeah, and patience too. I didn't want it to be like all about me because that's really boring.
Mm-hmm.
But the patients bring so much richness to it, and I'm ever grateful for what they offer and allowed me to share.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so great. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, to read patient stories is really powerful, because then you can see yourself in those stories, and it gives you hope, it gives you connection, validates you. So that's, yeah, I always look for
Yeah,
that.
we're not alone. Yeah, we're not alone. And you read a few patient stories, but the sad thing is that so many people have these stories,
Yeah.
and they could be anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, people with chronic disease, people with autoimmune disease, think of diabetes and, just issues with metabolism disorders, hormone imbalances, gut irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel, those types of things.
Yeah.
But somebody asked me on one podcast, who is this book for? And I'm like, anybody with a gut. And I'm just like, oh, that was so lame. But I mean, it is true. I mean, I had some friends read the book and comment on it, going, you know what, I don't really have any issues, but I learned that I could eat more vegetables. And I'm like, that's great, right? You took what you needed.
You took what you need. Yeah, exactly. You learn that your gut has a circadian rhythm. Who doesn't need that information? Everybody needs. It's such a cool.
That was cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Or that 1% of your DNA lives in your physical, like Talia or Laura self, So you have brown eyes. Yeah, that's like a tiny fraction of it. The rest of it is in your gut microbiome,
Yeah. And then, your microbiome is on your skin, in your eyes, in your nose, in your vaginal tract, in your bladder. And, is it also in your brain, right? Is it also in your liver, in your heart? Oh, maybe we have a microbiome everywhere.
Everywhere.
And I think, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you don't have a microbiome. Maybe your microbiome has you.
Well, we could be microbes having a human experience.
That's right. Yeah. They're just sort of like wearing a meat sack, an avatar. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.